Hello everyone and welcome to .NET Core Central. In my last video, I discussed events and delegates in .NET. Whenever we implement the event and delegate combination, we use observer pattern. Hence, discussing reactive extension is the natural progression in terms of the next step for implementing observer pattern. Reactive extension is a concept introduced in .NET with .NET 4, and reactive extension is essentially a combination of observer pattern with iterator pattern. And when we get into the details, it will become much more clearer what I mean by combination of these two. The main interfaces used in reactive extensions are IObservable and IObserver. The IObservable is also known as the dual of IEnumerable, meaning IEnumerable deals with pull for data or the data in rest, whereas IObservable deals with push of data or the data in motion. Using reactive extension, we can easily create stream of events or stream of data, compose and transform the stream of data or events with similar pattern as LINQ. And in terms of where we can use reactive extension, anywhere where we can use observer pattern, we can use reactive extension. The two main interfaces, as I mentioned earlier, which are the building blocks of reactive extensions, are IObservable of T and IObserver T. However, most of the time we would end up using ISubject of T, TH, which significantly simplifies the implementation of reactive extension. Now I'm going to show a demo where I will start with using IObservable and IObserver interfaces, and then slowly I'll progression into ISubject and some of the variation of ISubject, and then finally I'm going to use the out-of-box observable class and use some of the features like LINQ, which we can do on an observable. So for today's example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to deal with an example of even numbers. So first, let's create a class which will be responsible for creating or generating even numbers, and I'm going to name this class as even number observable. Once the class is created, I'm going to implement IObservable of int to this class, and I'm going to implement the interface IObservable of int. So the IObservable interface comes with a method of subscribe. So during the subscribe, what we are going to do is we are going to take the observer, which is coming as a part of subscribe, and then we are going to enumerate through a number 1 to 100, and then we'll just take the even numbers out of it and then call the onNext method of the observer. OnNext method of the observer is essentially calling back the observer with the new data. So to generate a integer range of 1 to 100, I'm going to use enumerable.range function. And I'm going to add the namespace system.LINQ, which has the definition of enumerable. And I'm going to take 1 to 100 as the range. Dot where so this is going to give only even numbers, and then I'm going to do a toList, and then I'll implement a for each, and here I'm going to say the observer dot next, and I'm going to pass the integer. And then finally I have to pass IDisposable object, and for that I'm going to just return the disposable.empty. And for getting the disposable.empty or using some of the advanced feature of reactive extension like subject, which I'm going to discuss later, I'm going to add the NuGet package for reactive extensions, and it's system.reactive. I'm just going to install that. Now here I can do, and for disposable I have to add the namespace system.reactive.disposables, and if I do that I can return an empty disposable as a part of this method. So this class is now ready. The next class I'm going to create is a console log observer. It is a observer implementation, which essentially is this IObserver implementation, which is just going to log in the console the number. So I'm going to create a new class. The name of the class is going to be console log observer, and this class is going to implement IObserver of int. And then when I implement the interface, as you have seen, the onNext method is part of this one, and this is the method which will be called back when onNext is called on the other observer class. So here I'm going to do console dot writeLine, and I can say even number is the number, and on error I'm just going to log console dot writeLine error, and on complete I'm just going to do console dot writeLine completed. Okay, so now the observer is also ready. Next thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the main method, just going to change it from hello world to completed. Let's make it static, and now here you can say var even number is equal to new of even number observable, and looks like I've given a wrong name here. Let me just change it quickly. Okay, even number observable. And the second thing to write console observer is equal to console log observer. And then what I can do is I can do even number dot subscribe, and here I'm going to pass the console observer and missing new. So that's about it. Now if I run this application, what is going to happen is the observer, these two classes, when I create, when I subscription happens, it's going to run through this whole range and call on onNext, which is going to print out the number. Let me provide a console.readLine here so that the application doesn't close after it finishes. And now I'm going to run this application. And if I run, we can see it's printing all the even number all the way up to 100. So this is how we can use IObservable and IObserver. Now let's simplify the implementation and just create a class, and we're going to call the class as even number subject, because now we are going to use the subject class to do the same exact implementation. So let's and this class, it's going to have a private read-only subject and subject of int, and the subject is available in the namespace system.reactive.subject. And if you remember, we added the NuGet package system.reactive. It is part of that namespace. And here we can use new. I am not using .NET 5, so let me change it to .NET 5 to ensure. Let me check the NuGet package. I didn't realize I was not using. This is 5.0. Okay, so now I can use this syntax because it's part of the new C# syntax. And then what I'm going to do is the next thing is the subject is disposable. So I'll implement IEdisposable and implement the dispose method. And as you can see, I'm getting a green squiggly to implement the dispose pattern. I am not going to use it just for the interest of time, but I have a video on the dispose pattern. You can look it up in my channel. It shows how to use the dispose pattern properly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do subject.dispose in the dispose method. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a run method. So the run method is something is, again, I'm just generating the same number as the IObservable example, and here the onNext is going to be in the subject. And I'll add the namespace Now the run method is something someone has to call, but in most of the example this run method might be something which is subscribed to an external stream or to event broker, and then it can get the message and continuously call subject.onNext, and this will create the in-memory reactive extension stream. But here for simplicity I am using IEnumerable.number. So we have the run, and then finally what we have to do is we'll create a subscription method because we have to subscribe. So I'll create a public void subscribe, and for the subscription I'm going to take an action of int, and I'll just call it action. And then what I'm going to do is here I'm going to make sure I create another array or a list of IDisposable, and I'm going to explain why. Disposable is equal to new. And then on subscribe what we are going to do is we're going to have disposables dot add, and then we'll do subject dot subscribe. Now subject dot subscribe returns an IDisposable, hence I'm adding those IDisposables into the list so that I can dispose them later on when the dispose is called. That is the only reason of creating this list. So I'm going to add this action in the subscription, and here now what I can do is I can do for each item in disposable, just call the dispose if the item is not null. So as you can see, using the subject we can just implement the whole thing without worrying about an IObservable and an IObserver. So now this class can be used by anyone to subscribe an action to and await on an event or on a series of data which will occur when run happens. So to test that, what we can do is I'm going to get rid of this code. And here for even number I can use even number subject instead of even number observable, and then I can do even number dot subscribe, and the subscribe can be console dot write line. That's the subscription. And of course, as you know, if I just was console.writeLine, by default the int which is returned by the method will be used in the writeLine. So I don't have to specifically do x goes to console.writeLine of x. This is a shortcut for that. And then finally what I'm going to do is I'm going to do even number dot run. And now if I run this application, I'll see again 2 to 100 even numbers getting printed out. And as you can see, we see 2 to 100 getting printed out just like before. Now before we go and use some of the nice features of observable class, I wanted to show a couple of other variation of subject. The first variation that I wanted to show is replace subject. So replace subject is same as subject, but before I do that, let me do something. Let me just move the subscription after run. If I move the subscription after run, what is going to happen is the events which are generated or the numbers which are generated will be lost and nothing will be printed out. And this is where the replace subject comes in handy. Replace subject caches the values. So now if I run, even though I have subscription later on, it will still print out all the numbers because everything was cached, and it will be delivered to a subscriber who comes in later. So consider it like a stream like Kafka or Kinesis, where if you define a lifetime of message, the message will be retained for that time. So it is a similar concept. The next thing I wanted to show is just like replace subject, we can have another implementation or another variation of subject, which is behavior subject. Now behavior subject, what happens is the constructor always takes a value. So we can pass a value. I'm going to pass just 0 here as an integer. And now the way behavior subject works is it works same as the replace subject, but it only prints the last one. So if we run it, it's just going to cache the last one, which is 100. And we can see it is printed only 100 here. And the last variation of subject is async subject. Async subject is very similar to the behavior and replace subject. I'm going to now get rid of this because we don't need it. The only difference is for async subject to execute, we have to call on the completed. So if I just run it as is, nothing is going to happen. But if I go here and I say if x is equal to 100, then subject dot on completed. So if I just do that, now what will happen is the last number will be retained, and as you can see, it is printing out 100. So that's about all the features of subject. Now let's get rid of this code, and if we want to implement the same feature or same functionality we saw with the subject, we can do the same thing with observable. So let's create observable, and for observable, again, it is part of the system.reactive NuGet package, and it is part of system.reactive.LINQ namespace. So I'm going to add that namespace, and then if I do .range, I'm going to get the same extension method as IEnumerable, but instead of IEnumerable, this time the return type is an IObservable. So I can say range of 1 to 100, and just like we can do conditions, I can implement condition here, and I can say where I can have the same condition as before, 0. So this is going to give me the even number, and then I can do dot subscribe, and in the subscribe you can just pass console.writeLine. Subscribe has bunch of overload, and I'm going to use the action of int overload. So here I can just say console.writeLine. That's all, and done. So you can see all the code that we did in the class can be done with just one line of code here. And if I run this, I'm going to see the exact same result as before, and I'm going to see 2 to 100 printed out. So that's an interesting concept. The other thing is we can use things like skip, take, distinct, any, all this feature in here. So if we say any, and we say x goes to x less than 10, then subscribe and console.writeLine. So we'll see it's printing true because we have numbers which are less than 10. But if we make these as greater than 100, this is going to return false, and we are going to see false printed out as expected. Similarly, we can use other features. So we can use things like take, and in take we can say okay, take fast 10. So we can do take 10, and if we do take 10, we should see till 20, and you can see we can see till 20. So we can use all these interesting features of LINQ here. So we can use things like count, and it's going to print out the count, which is 50. We can print out max, which is going to be 100. You can also use things like fast, last, and all these different combination. So these are some of the features. We can also of course use things like select, and in select we can say so instead of printing just 2, 4, and all the even number, it's going to say even number and then the actual number, and we can see it's printing. So there are so many things we can do with this. Now another feature we can use is merge, and using merge we can merge two observables. So I can use the same thing here. So I can say merge, and I can merge another 1 to 100 range of even numbers, and if I run this now, I will see 2 of the number appearing, 1 from each of the observable. So that's another feature that we can use. And then of course we can do a where condition and everything outside of the merge. So we can use where and other implementation here as well. So as you can see, the options are as vast as LINQ, and here instead of doing pull, we are doing push, because the where is on an IObservable. So we can do any sort of LINQ type query on event stream or data stream. So that's all I wanted to cover for today's video. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, and if you have any comment or question regarding the reactive extensions, or you want me to cover something more in reactive extensions, please leave a comment below and I will answer to your comment to best of my knowledge. And if you are new to my channel and if you think you are getting value out of my channel, please subscribe to my channel. And thanks so much for watching this video.